Howard, how are you?
Good, good.
Thank you ever so much for having us over.
Right now, so Mike and I are cranking right now.
Cranking's good.
Yeah, it's a good thing. So
thanks for having us over to your studio.
Sure, of course.
What is it called?
This is called West Valley Recording Studios. We've been here since 2012. We bought this place. It was a studio. It was made for a Disney guy who was doing very quiet music, and we had to do a lot of sound proofing to make it so we could do big amps and things like that. The console was a O2R.
Oh, yes.
Yamaha.
I remember those.
Something like that, yeah. We had to tear the floors out. I mean, it took us about 4 months to get it running. And then this thing fell into our laps from Vintage King. Got us a really good deal in Scotland. We had to have it shipped over and refurbished by Pat Schneider. And,
he's the best.
He's the best. He's the only one left, I think. Yeah. So here we are. Yeah, and we've been busy since. So we've been here 8 years. We have crazy amp racks over there, and
amazing.
We, we have a clientele that's mostly rock music and pop music. In the other rooms, Lenny Skolnick is in there. He does like Miyavi and more pop and rap kind of stuff. This is like a great piece of real estate to own too.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's sort of a real estate investment as well.
Oh, I love it. I love the fact you got this really long driveway and you come down and you don't know what to expect. I like that kind of anticipation.
Yeah.
And I was saying to Mike earlier, when I first moved to LA, the first record I made here was at Don's house, Don Smith's house in Agora.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just beautiful to be able to drive out on the 101 and get out of like Hollywood.
Yeah.
And like come where it's a lot calmer.
Yeah. It's sad that what happened to Don.
Yes, very sad.
We worked next to him at Base 7 Studios. He rented the room next to us to do mixing. So we would see him a lot, actually. So he made some great records.
Made some fantastic records, yeah.
So
give us a little bit of your journey, because I went back through your resume, and we were talking...
Mike's going to fall asleep. and
when I saw you at NAMM, I think it was... I was telling you about how this is a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, I was talking to one of the guys in Little Caesar. Doesn't he now work at like Black Star or something like that?
Singer. Yeah.
And he was saying that you made a record with him in the mid-late 80s. And he said that it was like...
It was 1989.
1989, okay. And he said it was like 15-hour days.
Yeah.
And you sweated blood for them and,
But we had a funny story, though, because when we made that record, that was one of the last kind of, quote, hair band records that was being made. I think they only let us make it because the contract, they had to make it. But, we were making the record, and it was some little studio in Red something or other in North Hollywood. And we're watching TV, and we're making the record, and this video comes on. And we're looking at this video, and it's this guy in a basketball gym with a person with a mop, and we put their song up and we hear Smells Like Teen Spirit. So the record must have been like 1990 then or something. And I remember thinking, I turned to Ron and I said, we're f***ed. Like you could tell something happened. Like it was so obvious because the video was almost on repeat on MTV. And that did not sound like us by any means, So, it was a kind of rough one, because we knew I did 2 or 3 more of those kind of records after that, and you knew you had to reinvent yourself. And that was part of my journey as a producer, was to learning how to reinvent myself, because you can't control the music that's being made.
Absolutely.
Or the times change. If you're a hair band guy and you're known as a hair band guy, you better start producing. And what's going to happen is you're not going to get hired to produce those things. You have to go find them. So I remember I had to go to Austin, Texas, and find a modern rock band that was like a Nirvana. And I found one, got them signed to Giant Records, ended up getting an A&R job out of getting them signed. So that reinvented myself again. So now I was not a hair band producer, I was a modern rock producer. Then all of a sudden, music changed again. And it was like Korn starting to happen. You have rap rock and new metal, but I'm making other kinds of music with Less Than Jake and stuff like that.
Sure.
So that goes out. So I went and found like a rap rock band called Zebrahead. Got him signed to Columbia.
Great.
Then started getting projects like that. And at that time I hadn't really sold that many records yet. I think the biggest record was maybe 200,000 records. But Pro Tools came along. And I was an early adopter. In 1997, I did Sepultura on it. It was a very early version, like 3.0, where if you breathed on it, it crashed.
I remember it well.
One of those, yeah. So, and I think that's when P.O.D. came into my life. And that was the first really big major platinum record I had. And then I did a really big record on their next one. And then Cold came along and All American Rejects, and I met Mike. And I realized at that point, I really don't want to deal with what's going on out there or this. I want to deal with that. So that became sort of a division of labor in the studio. And I realized from my aerospace engineering background, I could more or less hire people and delegate stuff to other people to do stuff. And I could focus on the music and the songs and the vocals and the lyric, the things that were the bigger picture stuff. And then it just all took off from there. So I think a lot of it was just that, learning on the fly. I had some good mentors. Keith Olsen was a good mentor of mine that I learned a lot from. And, just other producers you run into along the way give you little bits of information and all that. So.
Did you work with Keith as an engineer?
No, Keith was an interesting story. This is actually right at the end of the hair band era. And I was doing a band called Soundscan. Butch Walker was in it. This is the second album, and this is at the end of that whole era. There was a lot of panic on board with the managers and the record companies. We signed too many hair bands. I'm just like, how do I feed my family? That's all I'm thinking about, right? So I took the second Soundscan record. 2 weeks into it, the new manager takes over from the old manager, goes, I don't know who the hell Howard Benson is. He's fired. I'm bringing in Keith Olsen. So I was fired off the project, right? He had every right to fire me too, because I didn't really quite know yet what I was doing. I'd only done maybe 6 or 7 albums, and I was still figuring out the job. So what happened was I went into the studio, and Keith goes, why are you here? I'm the new producer. You should, you're out. It's me and the band now, And I said, hey, would you let me just watch
the
sessions? And I said, I'll be your assistant. I'll do whatever you want. Because I knew at that point I needed a mentor. I was doing the same shit over and over with no process at all. But I'd see the tape and there's all these blank reels of tape. Let's do it this way this time. And let's do it that way this time. Keith, on the other hand, was a very process-oriented guy, and I related to him that way. So he goes, okay, that's really pretty amazing that you're even willing to do that, because you're going to come back in with a band that just fired you and look like, are you going to be all right with that? And I said, yeah, I'm into it. And he goes, you're going to be successful one day because of this move you're doing. Just because I was able to jump back down to 6 levels and start over, So the next day the band shows up and they're going, what are you doing here? And I said, hey, I'm just watching, and helping Keith out. And I watched how Keith handled the session, and he was very, he was the man. I hadn't learned to be the man yet, but he was the guy. And if you didn't agree with him, he would sit you down in his room full of platinum records and say, what do I know? How many records have you sold? He was doing all this kind of stuff that I couldn't in a million years imagine doing. But I was like, yes, this is the way it's supposed to be done, and it made but everything was also very, it was today we're doing the drums. All the drums get done. Next we're doing the guitars. This is how I do guitars. This is how I do this. This is how I do vocals. Print out a vocal sheet. Rate every single line, 7, 8, 9 or whatever. So all this kind of stuff was happening, and the band lost control of this. Because with me, I was their friend, so they had control of the session. With Keith, it wasn't theirs a session anymore. It was Keith's session. But even though it seemed like that from the outside, it really, if they were smart enough band, which they were not a smart enough band, they would have realized that he was doing them a huge favor by creating this work environment where they could be creative as long as they stuck to certain things which they didn't want to. I've walked out of sessions. Yeah, if the artist doesn't, if it's so, I'm not a demagogue, but if they're doing something so messed up, I'm out. Right. Call your manager. Go find somebody else to produce you. Yeah. It's not that important. If you think it's not that important to you, it's not that important to me. Why am I working harder than you're working? You know? So sometimes you have to pull that. That doesn't happen as much anymore. Artists, I think, are a lot more business oriented now. So
out of necessity.
You have to.
Yeah.
You have to run your own. You don't even get signed unless you have 10 million streams now. So, you better know how to run your business to get it to that point.
Albums are being made for the same price of the old food budget.
Oh, yeah. But we do get, we're working on an artist named Diamante now, and I'm the record company, so I own half the master.
Fantastic.
And I fund the project, and we own the record, and that's the way to go. It's sort of the movie business in a way, where you write the script, you own the production company, and you put it up there and see if it works. If it doesn't, you release it yourself. If it does, you sell it off to a record company. So it's very much the movie business right now. That's kind of how I see it working.
One of the things that, frankly, you're known for is being really smart in business and making really good decisions. You've just described all of that. Like, you pivot quicker than anybody else.
Right.
Like, I remember with the big rock records, what are we talking about? 2010, 8, 9, 10 sort of period where it suddenly went from like X number of $100,000 to less than $100,000 to make an album. It was 6 weeks as standard, and suddenly it was like, well, can you do it in 3 weeks?
Right.
And I remember having a conversation with an A&R guy going, oh, well, you know, Howard's doing this. He's now saying it's going to take this amount of time. It's going to cost this amount of dollars. And he's also like, if I'm going to work on these songs, we're talking about publishing, we're talking about this, that, and the other. I suppose for us, you're sort of the trailblazer because you will do that first, and then we'll sort of follow you.
I think a lot of that was done out of necessity. Like, it's always the mother of invention. You know?
Yeah.
So, like, when we moved into here, it was right at the tipping point about 2012, where the budgets were starting to crash. You know, and there was that time between selling records and streaming, which was about 3 or 4 years, where the music business really tanked because we didn't know where the money was going to come from. You know, and they hadn't figured out how to collect it. There was no Spotify. It just started. So I said to Mike, like, when we can't afford to be at Base 7 anymore, but I can afford to buy a house and put a studio in it as a real estate investment. So the trick to this place, it doesn't really need to make money. It just needs to break even, because I look at it as it's the McDonald's version of things. McDonald's is not about hamburgers. It's about the real estate they own. So this is about the same with the, and if you're a studio owner and you're still paying rent, good luck. I don't know how you do it, because there's just not enough money to pay the rent, you know? So the cost of keeping this place alive, we pretty much every year hit it right on the number, you know? So it's fine for me. The other thing is that the labels I found, first of all, from the publishing end, the bands were like, okay, we'll give you like X% of the publishing to work on the record. The labels were like, okay, instead of getting 4 points, I'll give you 8 points to work on the record. And so I was like, okay, the hard part about all this stuff, I'm learning. I have another team of people working on this right now. You really have to make sure your contracts are done right and your sound exchange is done right and you're collecting the money. You know what the recoupment is. We have been able to collect a lot of money recently from projects that you would think are not recouped. Because what you're seeing is the streaming numbers are starting to pick up. So you have to have somebody doing that for you. That's a full-time job, is doing the analytics, you know? And you can do the analytics. It's possible. You just have to have someone do them for you. Because then you can kind of predict what you should be really being paid. And then you have to have someone calling the record company up and going, hey, this record cost $40,000. This is how many streams it did. This is how much we spent. You owe us a check. You know? And so they'll go, no, I don't owe you a check. The trick is not to sue them. The trick is just to keep emailing them and emailing them and emailing, and eventually it works out. You know, I've never had to sue anybody. You know,
I've actually just going through that at the moment. Was just listening to a record that I'd worked on, and I couldn't help but notice that one song on the album's got 36 million streams, just one song. So then I start looking at all of this, and then I did the math, and I'm like, worked out how much I spent. This is just only on Spotify. I'm like going, we're recouped like 5 times. No matter how they shape.
No matter how they look at it.
We recoup 5 times.
That's right.
And so my manager's just sitting there like doing exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Sending that email.
If you can give first of all, you have to have the production agreement. It has to be signed. The letter of directions have to be right. This is where it gets tricky, because if you have a lawyer that didn't get them to sign it, or you didn't sign it, or the LOD isn't in place, or sound exchange is really difficult now with that stuff. You have to make sure all that works out. I'm very lucky. We got into Sound Exchange in 2003.
Great.
My manager was down in Washington, along with Bennett Kaufman. It was Lee and Bennett Kaufman and a few other guys.
Bennett's my manager.
Oh, yeah. So he was there, actually.
Great guy, yeah.
And he said, if you're going to pay the artists, we want the producers to have letters of direction.
Yeah.
So you got to have those. But they don't even accept those letters of direction anymore. You have to keep redoing them with new stuff. You know, it used to be that the band's manager could sign it. They don't accept that anymore. The band members all have to sign it now, so you have to resubmit. It's, you know, somebody said to me, aren't you upset that it takes this much work and Sound Exchange is all messed up and they're this and that? I said, listen, it's the Wild West, man. You can't blame them for being... At
least they're doing it.
6 years ago, there was no Spotify even, you know? So now, or 8 years ago, so like all this stuff is happening so quick that you got it. You can't just blatantly go, we're going to sue Sound Exchange. I mean, come on, they're doing it, So you're right. It's somebody's doing it.
Yeah. I have an artist that we're trying to get them to complete the sound exchange forms. It's just that.
Yeah, because you can't get it unless they do it.
Yeah.
And they won't do it.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
It's like, what it is? It's artists are horrendous businessmen.
Sure.
That's why you have to be responsible for your own business, and I learned that early on. Like, I had a good first manager was Shep Gordon, who was the first guy.
That's a great way to start. Supermensch.
Yeah, Supermensch. And in 1988, he took me on as a client, and I walked into his office and I said, Shep, thank you for managing me. Like, I was like, it's like Rat Eye, one of those movies where thank you for giving me my life,
Yeah.
And I said, well, would you give me any suggestions as a producer? And he goes, get the check. That was it. Right? And I walked out and I went, get the check. What the hell does that mean? But then you realize what it really means is you do not have the project unless the money is in the bank.
Sure.
So you can think you do, and you can tell everybody you do, and you can start recording. And if you don't have the money in the bank, that means that you can get easily, really easily. The artist can change their mind. The band can break up. The label can, there's so many things that can go wrong on these things, So I started really sort of like internalizing that and going, because, Mike even knows this, like until we get the money, we're not producing the record. Everybody promises everything in this town. That's the nature of it. People just talk shit all the time. So Shep was really good at that. Shep sort of invented that way of thinking with Alice Cooper and all those guys. So yeah, get the check.
You've made a schnizzle ton of records from the 80s right through to now.
54 albums.
Your career growth was like this. It comes up and up, and you're at a point now where you're just making some of the best sounding records. What is your favorite things that you've done? Is there things for you, maybe even early on? Is there things that you just
I guess the
put a
early
big smile
ones,
on your face?
The early on ones are always the easiest to talk about because they're like kids almost, these things,
Sure.
But the early on ones are the ones where you sort of were finding your way through things. And I think the early record I did, like the Wild Seeds, was one of the first albums I did that got notoriety.
Great.
And I remember thinking, okay, that was really cool. And Bang Tango was a record that
gently
put me into the world. And Motorhead records were, I wouldn't call them fun, but I learned a lot working with Lemmy. Like I did 4 of those things. I think the early P.O.D. records were fun because we were just really getting Pro Tools to do what we wanted it to do. Like when I did Sepultura and Les and Jake, Pro Tools, I like doing that. I think about it more about the process, And the Les and Jake I love doing in Pro Tools, but I still was a little bit learning it. We just got auto-tuned at that point, so we were all using it wrong. We're putting it on everything.
Yeah.
So, but when I did the P.O.D. records, I remember thinking, okay, this sounds kind of the way I want it to sound. Like big choruses, huge anthemic parts. That's always what I like to listen to. I was a big prog rock fan growing up.
Huge prog fan.
ELP fan.
Oh, yeah. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, yeah.
They're doing a movie,
Oh, they are?
Carnival 9.
I didn't know.
A real movie with Radar Pictures, yeah. And they got a script and everything.
Wow.
And it's so about one day in the year is a carnival, where the one person gets to experience life the way it's supposed to be.
That's amazing.
It's supposed to be, So I already told my manager, I have to be on this thing somehow, Those are all big records, Yes, and those kind of things. So the problem with those records is they had no real emotion. I was listening as a kid to that and at the same time the Sex Pistols on the same listening. So people would always say, you don't really have a style. Well, I kind of, as a producer, really don't either. I just like making the best records for the artist. Like I've worked with Kelly Clarkson and I've worked with Rascal Flatts and I've also done 3 Days Grace records and Motorhead records. So there's not a really, you can't really say I don't stick to one thing. Like I like moving around a lot. And it's healthy to do that.
I think, I agree. It's healthy. I also think it's all the best producers. If we look at guys we admire, look at John Leckie. he did Radiohead The Bends, he did Kula Shaker's first record, he did Stone Roses' first record, and he was an engineer on All Things Must Pass by George Harrison. It's
amazing
just
stuff.
Makes music. Or even George Martin, of course, from Beatles to Jeff Beck, Blow by Blow to you name it.
Well, you learn, I used to admire Rick Rubin because I remember thinking in 2000, before I had any real hits, or 1999, Rick would always have these hits, but he was never as involved as I was. I was involved in everything. And I remember thinking, what is Rick doing that I'm not doing? And I remember thinking, it's sort of this, it's not about you, it's about them. It's the songs and who they are and do they move you or not. that's it really for me. I thought he was really good at picking those kind of things. So he could do the Dixie Chicks, and then he could do crazy rock records that were just, all over the place, Johnny Cash records. And
totally.
Mostly because of his vision of the bigness of things, the bigger vision. So, yeah.
Yeah, I did Californication pre-pro with the band for like 6 months. And what he would do is he'd come down like 3 times a week, and they'd be rehearsing 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And he would just come down and go, what have you got? Play stuff, give them pointers, come back 2 days later, see what they've worked on. And you knew by the end of 6 months of pre-production that they really just needed somebody as great as Jim to sort of press record and record it. And, obviously get great tones. But you knew that the songs were just...
It was already there.
It was already there.
You don't get that anymore with these artists because you don't have the time. Yeah. They're always touring now because that's where the money is.
Yeah.
So your time of them writing songs is so compressed now into small, like a band like In Flames will come in here, they'll come off tour, they'll come in, we'll record the record within 2 months, and they're gone. But everything has to be almost done on the fly, the songwriting, everything.
Sure.
So you really have to have your wits about you, Like you can't, pre-pro is, I don't think I've done pre-pro in a long time. I used to do it all the time. Now I get files sent to me and you just say, we'll work from this file, we'll do this, this, and this. But you know what? At some point, you're good enough at this stuff where you know what to do. Like, you don't need 5 weeks of this. You go, this will work, this will work, this will work. And if the bands are smart, they usually go home at night and do homework for you. Like I always assign them homework every night. Do this, rewrite that, rewrite that, rewrite that. But it's mostly within the recording process now.
That's the great thing about the technology is that we can move so much faster.
That's right. And the bands can send you stuff right away. And who was really good at that before the technology was My Chemical Romance. When I was doing pre-pro with them, I'd always give them suggestions. The next day they'd come back with ready, and they were always listening and processing, in their own way. So one of the things to do is not to kind of get in the way of that. Let them do it their way,
Sure.
So
when I first started working as an engineer, I worked with Dave Jordan for a bit, and he said sometimes you have to get in there and rewrite the songs with the band. And other times you just have to get out of the way and help them make a great record.
That's what people don't realize about our jobs. Sometimes you're in all the way, songwriting, all that stuff, and sometimes you're just facilitating it. There's no real way of doing it, and people go, well, you didn't really do anything. Well, your presence did a lot, actually. The fact that you're hired makes everybody step to it better. Like they raise their level. That's why they pay you the money, And
if you didn't do anything and it was successful, it means that you were smart.
You were smart.
Because you didn't get in there and ruin it.
Yeah. I think Mark Durnley, when I was working with him, he told me about AC/DC. He was working with Mutt Lange at the time. He was his engineer. And I said, how'd you get those guitar sounds? And he goes, I put up a mic and got out of the way. Mm-hmm. That was it.
Yeah.
57, mic, get out of the way, So sometimes doing nothing's, all these buttons are cool and all that, but sometimes you have to know which ones not to push,
I'm a huge Formula One fan.
Are you?
Oh, yeah.
It's funny. I never was till I saw Drive for Survive on Netflix last year.
Oh, wow.
And did you see that?
Yeah.
I never even knew a thing about the sport. And I watched the 10 episodes and I was in. But I started getting into went to Grenada where Lewis Hamilton was born, and not to go there, but now I know all the racers, and I'm a Verstappen fan.
You see those?
He's amazing. It's great.
Hamilton, though, he's so fat. The new car they tested this week.
They blew everybody away again.
It's all about the driver.
All about the driver.
When you watch Lewis Hamilton from the cockpit, that guy is so steady.
He's a machine.
The other guys are like this. Yeah. He's a machine. Yeah.
For me, the best driver of all time is probably a Scottish driver, Jim Clark. His win ratio was 65%.
Wow.
Of every race he entered.
Do you like Verstappen though?
Oh, amazing! Yeah, my mother's Irish and Dutch. I'm a real mix, so I've got a lot of Dutch family. Yeah, he's a firecracker.
He's calmed down a little bit. Last year.
He'll be the world champion, and it's definitely going to be Verstappen and Leclerc are going to be fighting it out once Lewis retires.
Too. Yeah. I had no idea there were different levels of you have a constructor thing and you have a racer thing. You start learning more about it. Well, so I watched all the races last year, and I thought a lot of them were kind of okay, this is the way it's going to end like this. The most interesting one was when they had to restart, after a flag and everybody had to bunch back up.
Sure.
And watching how Lewis Hamilton manipulated the pack and how he was able to pull ahead and slow down, and it was crazy. Like
Yeah.
that's a whole other. Because I thought that wasn't really fair, but then when you watch the restarts, it actually is fun.
Do you know Jackie Stewart?
Of course.
When he won his third world championship, remember he won it like 2 or 3 races before the end of the season, and then he retired. And they're like, "Why don't you finish out the season? Just to say you did it." He goes, "Well, in that last race," he said, "I got in the car and I wasn't scared anymore."
He wasn't scared.
He wasn't
Wow.
scared anymore, so he retired. Well, thanks ever so much.
Okay.
It's been a lot of
good
fun.
knowing you.
I really appreciate it. Please leave a bunch of comments and questions below. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing, and we'll see you all again very soon.